Yes. Okay. Excellent. All right. So for your next speaker, this is Eric Schaffer. He is the founder of Human Factors International and the head of HFI Labs. He's been in the field since 1977, and he's a thought leader on UX and UX maturity. Please welcome in the chat, Eric Schaffer. And by the way, remember the Q&A box is for questions.
All right, welcome to this one. And I would like to share with you some thoughts, some experience I've been having in terms of how we set up UX practices. And you know that institutionalization of UX is something that's been kind of core to what I've been working on. And what we've seen is that for the last decade, executives are going, we want to be great at customer experience. I mean, this is from Forrester in 2012, and 93% of companies are going, it's a strategic imperative, but then why do we still have so much difficulty? Why are organizations saying we have a big gap in customer centricity? What's the problem? It's not that our field is obscure or impossible, or we haven't started research. It's 3 generations long. But I think the problem is that we haven't done a good job of institutionalizing UX. And so take a quick screen grab of this, and then you don't have to buy my book. But the numbers are actually the chapters in the book. And what you see is that if you fail in any of these areas, bad things happen. That there are consequences to not institutionalizing UX properly. Let me talk a little bit about some of the key ones that I'm seeing. The most important thing is executive championship, and today we're way better at getting executive champions. The problem is, first of all, though, that they tend to give us very general kinds of objectives, like we want great customer centricity, or we want to go the extra mile. What do you do with that? And is there a competing organization? Is there another bank that's going like, we don't want to pay attention to our customers, we don't want to be excellent, we won't do what we say we'll do, and we're not going the extra mile? That's not happening. That's not a differentiator. And so one of the things that's a problem with a lot of executive champions is they don't actually own a North Star. And a North Star says that, for example, we're a bank that innovates so you can save the world bit by bit. If that's your objective, everything, all the touch points have to align with that. All through the organization has to align. And that won't happen if we don't have that clearly established. What is the differentiated position? Another thing is budget. And one of the things we're seeing is we're moving away from what we've said for 20 years, that 10% of your development budget, your headcount should be UX people, and it's moving more towards 20%. And that's because software development's getting more efficient, and it's because the bar is moving up in terms of the requirement for quality of the work we do. So executives need to make sure there's money. There's also a change management process that needs to be in place. And if this isn't followed, you can have an organization that knows how to do UX work, but isn't really integrated. It isn't built into the DNA of the company, and it's not included in a lot of the processes it should be. So you can actually set up a UX practice, but have it not really working because of problems in change management. And finally, we have some case where actually you do the design, but it's not actually delivered. The coding doesn't get done. And that can be because there's a disconnect in the way that the coding's done. They may be approaching it from a technology-centered viewpoint, as opposed to what we want, which is thinking about not the technology stack, but the customer experience stack. And so if our work doesn't get out, we're not going to make a difference. we also have to think about methodology, and that sounds a little obscure, but the problem with methodology is often if you have an organization without an explicit documented UX methodology, it's like going, hey, we're opening a restaurant and there will be food, and people walk around going, oh yeah, we need to do UX. There's no such thing as doing UX, right? UX has a set of very clearly defined processes, projects. And so we need to be explicit about what it is we're serving up. What kind of projects we're going to do actually determines a lot of stuff. So if you think about creating a restaurant, don't you want to have a knowledge of what the menu looks like? Because that will even change how the kitchen is laid out. You're going to have a lot of salads. You need to have space for that. It matters in terms of the way the cutlery that you're buying. It matters the way the signage is handled. So when we understand the kind of programs we're doing, we know things like what kind of infrastructure we need, what kind of staff we need. In a sense, we can't set up a practice without a methodology. So it's actually one of the most important things. That methodology needs to be detailed. There should be a document about every step along the way. Having it that understood in a solid way also allows me to get insights. So for example, in the agile world, if you don't sprint ahead, bad things will happen. Basically, you'll be making changes during the sprint to the design and the coders will keep getting mad at you. So you get to innovate on your method and find better things to do if you have a proper methodology that you can refer to. So you're having a repeatable process. We also have the ability to use that methodology to hang our reusable templates on. So, in our world, I wouldn't ever like develop a usability testing protocol. I would go on to our methodology for usability testing. I would click on usability protocol, and then I would start editing an old one or a baseline one. And so the methodology is really the only way to organize that properly. So we end up going, do UX if we don't have methodology. Standards, design systems, that's a very old idea. And if you don't have that, basically, you reinvent the wheel, you recode the wheel, and you make it difficult to do maintenance work because everything's done differently. And the user's faced with inconsistencies that are terrible. The other thing is that when you focus on getting your standards right, once you have them right, you may have invested a lot in how you do a list or a form or something like that. But that design that you've optimized is going to be way better than what any one developer can do under pressure of getting the project done. Another thing that I think is very crucial is building an ecosystem model where I understand what's going on in the space in a big picture. And in order to get that big picture so I can see the consequences, avoid unintended consequences, I need to build a growing model. If I don't do that, what happens is every time I do a project, I'm focusing on that one project, and I only see and I only learn about that project. This is a problem that you have when you bring in vendors to do work, and every vendor comes in, kind of starts from scratch, and every vendor is going, hey, I'm coming in here and I'm looking just at what's going on in an ATM or just what's going on in a particular workstation. I need to have the bigger picture or I miss things. Training is kind of interesting for me. And HFI, we've been doing training and certification forever. Many of you are CUAs. Congratulations. And the model I have in my head is it's a little like putting an organization together with people with different shapes of skills. They do different things well. And that job is really hard. In fact, most of the time it doesn't work, particularly because not only do I need to fit the staff together properly, but the staff keep deciding to go to another place. So think about building a wall like this, but the rocks every 2 years, a couple of them jump out. And I think the trick to it, to being able to successfully meet the need, is to having the right training so that you know that people have at least a baseline set of skills, common language. If we don't do that, we're going to have gaps in the wall. And those gaps mean that our programs are not being done properly. Knowledge management is an area that I've spent a lot of time on, and frankly, I feel like it's a deep problem in our field. In our field, I think UX practices have the short-term memory of a goldfish. We start everything from scratch, and there's a reason for it. Everything we have, say a user, but it could be an environment, it could be a scenario. That user actually shows up in lots of projects. So I have maybe 20 different projects that cover something about the user. Every project has like 20 documents. Every document has 50 pages. And buried in there, you're going, there's stuff about the user. This sounds like no problem because you're going, well, I'll just do a search of some kind. I can find everywhere that Summit Rye shows up. The problem is that we call people different things. So this is Kathleen, and this is the format that we talk about Kathleen and what we've learned about Kathleen. Okay, good. Now do a search for Kathleen. No, because somewhere else, she's called Becky. And there's a different format of data. And somewhere else, Laura, and a different format of data. So I've got this massive information about that kind of user, but named differently. And it's for, even if I found them all, think about trying to read all these different kinds of descriptions and make sense of it. It's basically impossible to do. And so we really end up almost redoing our research again. And what we want to do is go, we have a container that we always use for each kind of data, a scenario, an environment, a user. And then I can look at this, understand it quickly, see where the gaps are, and I know where to look, as opposed to reading paragraphs and paragraphs. So knowledge management is about getting my information stored, but also in a way that's accessible and usable where I can find it. Governance. There's a thing out to pay attention to this, that there's a thing out called DesignOps. And a lot of people are talking about DesignOps these days. DesignOps is your process for doing design. And so I think a major part of it is having an operating model. And really every time we start up a team working in some place, we develop an operating model that says, how does the work flow? How is it prioritized? How is it scoped? And having that in place, understanding what the roles are and what they're doing, is very key. Otherwise, what's happening is just an informal flow of work, and it's very inefficient, very unreliable, and things get dropped. A piece of it that I think is very important in Insight is that you want to have in every organization a design authority. And a design authority is the central authority that adjudicates the design, that says we have that North Star. Are we driving that North Star out? We have standards. What should the standards be? And are we driving those standards out? Are we following best design practices? So having a good design authority is really important. And then having good metrics is key. And so many organizations right now are going like, yeah, we care about net promoter score. And, if you understand user research, net promoter score is not a wonderful metric. The main thing that's good about it is executives understand it easily, but it's not a great predictor of success, and it doesn't give you a very clear picture. In fact, though, there's no metric that gives a clear picture. You need a dashboard of metrics that come together to guide you. So if you rely on net promoter score, you are really chasing a little bit of an illusion, and it doesn't give you a good picture. Organizational structure. I want to thank Noah because he has really pushed us at HFI, and we've been talking a lot about what the organizational structure of the future will be. And what we're thinking is that there'll be an overall chief experience officer who has an experience group that's responsible for that North Star for the omnichannel UX strategy, that has that design authority in there. And reporting to that chief experience officer is the marketing operation. Marketing is about customer experience, sets their expectation. Is the UX design organization, which is building the experiences, and there are lots of parts of that. Yeah. So there's service design that does, this is the internal workings that we have to have our staff make the customer experience that we want. There's interface design, there's persuasion, all that stuff is there. And then there's the CX group, which is doing measurement. And that's doing that dashboard. That's hope, if it's just net promoter score, I'm going to be crying. Okay. So getting that right kind of structure. And, one of the things that I see now that worries me is that you'll see research groups separated from design, which sounds like it might make sense. But the problem is that you don't do research and then design, right? What you do is you do some innovation focused research, and then you do ideation, and then you do research that validates the ideation, and then you work on the strategy, and cycles and cycles and cycles. So if you have these groups separated, they better be pretty good friends. Let's talk about staffing. I've got a session that uh, Jay Moore, our president in US and Europe, he really pushed me to make this presentation on issues with staffing. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. I'll have 6 problems that people commonly have, mistakes people make with staffing UX. It started with 6, it's now at 18. And so there's lots of mistakes that happen. I mean, for example, people overestimate how important it is to have somebody doing UX who knows your domain. Yes, it is an advantage, but being good at UX means being able to go into a domain, whatever it might be. It might be medical, it might be petrophysics, whatever it is. Understand it, model it, and work in it. So I expect people who are great at UX to quickly onboard and work in any area. One of the things that's a big issue that I see is that there's such a major difference between designing for full-time staff-assisted kind of environments and your customer-facing either B2B, B2C, because like these are all designs we've done at HFI. Look how different they are. You wouldn't think about going, okay, I'm going to have my staff using my public website to onboard people. It's just not, it's not the way things get done, right? there's such different requirements, and you need people with a very different orientation looking at these two kinds of issues. And I'm going to share Noah's ladder again here. So there is a ladder of skills that we all grow through as practitioners that our UX practices grow through. You'll see practices that start, we just do usability testing, which is sad, but then they grow up, eventually, hopefully doing strategy. But when we're talking about staffing, we keep having requests that go, yeah, we want people that do all of it. Now, if you pay a lot of money, you can get somebody who will do all of it. But if you think about it, if I'm somebody who's capable of doing UX strategy and innovation and persuasion, if you've got me doing usability testing and detailed design 2/3 of my time, I'm going to quit. So we really can't go, give me somebody that can do all the UX stuff. We need to get somebody appropriate to the bulk of the work being done. The last thing I'll talk about is the mistake I made. So if you read my book, I made a mistake. I made a cookbook for building a UX practice. Just like Heathkit initially made radios and you could put together a radio and it was reasonable. The problem is that Heathkit later made computers, and there's an awful lot of parts in a computer. And there's an awful lot of parts in a UX practice. So what I found is that it's a really long road that not everyone makes it through to organically build a UX practice from scratch, or even assembling the components is very difficult. So what we're seeing is a better practice, and something to look at is bringing in a pre-prepared UX team in a box with all the methods and standards and staffing solution in place, and at least have that as a seed team that can then grow out your practice instead of trying to kind of compile something. Okay, so I shared a few thoughts about institutionalization.
All right. Please give Eric a big thank you in the chat box. Reminder that if you want everyone to be able to see it, you got to click the drop down so we can all see that. Thanks so much, Eric. Right. So